Well, I'd like to start by picking up on Earl's point about sharing and about aiming for quality or not quality. Quality is quite an abstract measure, and we have had a long tradition of editors deciding on quality and what they believe. And mostly they do a remarkably good job of it. But one of the best things about my job really is that I feel as though I'm a representative of readers in a broad sense in the newsroom. Because sometimes what we think is our best content isn't what readers think is the best content, or stories that we think are important but not hugely significant, readers are suggesting on Twitter or on Facebook or on LinkedIn or in the comments on our website that they're much more important than we thought they were. And that brings me to one of the reasons we do this. A lot of people do social media now in some way because it's the cool thing to do. But actually, me going to our CEO and saying, hey, we should do social media because it's cool, it's not going to cut it. So we've got 4 broad reasons. And one of them is that measure of quality. It's about improving our journalism. It's about looking again at the kinds of stories we're covering. Is there a different way to do this? Can we find a different eyewitness who can add something else, who we didn't find through our traditional channels? Is there a story out there? There was last week, for example, there was a murder case in Scotland. And there was a suggestion that this murder was because the guy was homosexual. And we reported it, we covered it, article went in the paper. It wasn't a huge story. Very sadly, there are lots of murders. They very rarely make the front page unless there's something particularly unusual about them. But on the web, there was a huge amount of conversation around this particular story. And we realized quite quickly that there was much more interest in it than we'd thought there'd be. And we went back and looked again and did some more reporting on it and more investigation into it, and the story developed through the week. And that might seem quite a small case, it's just one story. But if you start introducing reader views back into the newsroom in that way, you can really, we believe, enrich your journalism and add a different dimension to the kind of stories you're telling. And sometimes it's about stories you've missed. Sometimes it's about introducing a reader's view on something. If everybody's debating Europe at the moment and the Eurozone crisis, what do our readers think of that? Which bits of the story haven't they understood or would they like to know more about? We can have one perspective from our editors, but if we can challenge that with views from a really engaged and informed readership, then that's all the better. But this is also partly about loyalty in a digital world where we know that our readers get news and information from all over the world, from newspapers, magazines, TV stations, radio stations, all over the world. And that's fantastic. We're also never going to stop it, even if it wasn't fantastic. But there's still a place for feeling like a Telegraph reader. And if we can create that sense of a club, that sense of belonging, that sense of like-minded people, and we can use social media and comments on our site to bring people in, then we can hopefully build a more loyal digital audience, one that doesn't jump in and out of Google and never come back to us and not even remember that the article they read was on the Telegraph, but one that starts choosing the Telegraph for their news. The third reason is audience growth. Social media gives you a great way to find people who are interested in a topic. Maybe they're talking about cricket, but they don't know about our cricket correspondent, or they haven't found our coverage. If our cricket correspondent is active on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, they can go out and join those conversations and start bringing readers back to a particular area of our coverage and hopefully convert those readers into more regular readers. And the final reason, which sort of takes me outside of the newsroom, which is where I trained and where I belong, really, many would say, and into the rest of the business and over onto the side of more of our commercial teams. We're getting increasing numbers of requests from advertisers to market to our social media audiences. Sometimes they obviously want to come and buy adverts in the paper, or they want to come and advertise on the website. But some want to come and advertise to our Facebook audience specifically. And they're telling us that they want to do that, partly because we know a lot about them. Facebook provides a lot of data about them. And partly because they fit that demographic and they are going after an audience on Facebook. They believe, perhaps in the case of LinkedIn, that they're going to get a different kind of person or a person at a different point in their day if they've come in from LinkedIn than if they've come in from Facebook. So increasingly, this isn't something we're just doing from a Telegraph perspective to enhance what we're doing. It's something advertisers are demanding that we do. And my job is really to both be that advocate for readers, to help journalists use these tools to go and dig out stories and find new leads, but also to help manage the balance between being able to sell this engaged audience and sell against this engaged audience and sell to them, but do that in a way that it doesn't undermine our editorial credibility. So sitting between the two camps is very much where I see myself. And I figure out that minefield, if you like, by coming back to the readers. I'm there for readers. And if it makes sense for them, and we're giving them good opportunities, and we're listening to them, and it's working for them, we've probably got the balance about right.
Great, perfect. So Kate, you've given a good explanation of, if you're a media company, why these are some of the ways that you could leverage social media. Arvind, I'm going to turn to you. What if you are not a media company, like you're just a manufacturer or a seller, or you are an agency? Okay, this is all exciting and hot, and I'm hot and bothered about it. Now, what do I actually do?
So I think it's, the reality is today that your audience is already on social media. They're on Facebook, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Twitter. And it's much easier to fish where the fish are than fishing where they aren't. We're trying to get them to come to your website. And so if you can get them in a place they're already engaged, then you're much more likely to actually develop a relationship with them. But again, the tools that you do are somewhat, the practices that you use are a little bit different. You know, I think that it really begins with trust, establishing trust with this audience. You know, the reality is, again, no matter what the company is, pick a company, pick a brand, someone's probably having a conversation about your product on social media. They might be having a conversation about your latest server technology in a technical forum on LinkedIn. They may be talking about why they like or dislike your latest soft drink on Facebook. So if you're not part of that conversation, it's gonna get shaped, and their perception is gonna be shaped by others. You're not gonna have a stake in the game. You're gonna be much more likely to be successful to influence the conversation if you're there. So now, how do you do that? And I think it begins with having a presence and building a community. So on LinkedIn, what you can do, on Facebook you can build a fan page, on LinkedIn you can build a company page. But once you've built a company page, you can attract people to follow your company. Now the advantage of doing that is once they follow your company, you can then push things into their feed on LinkedIn. So they will now see updates from your company in their status updates. Every time there's an update they like, they can comment on it, they can share it with others, they can even tweet it onto Twitter. So again, now you're leveraging this audience that you've built to expand your message. Now, again, to get them to want to start doing that, they've got to trust you. And so partly what you've got to do is establish that you're really giving them something of value. And so a lot of companies, and I think my favorite example is Philips, has spent a lot of time cultivating and building a community on LinkedIn. They were trying to establish thought leadership in two significant areas for them, lighting and healthcare. And so they built two communities, one on lighting, one on healthcare. And they brought in world-leading experts who were on LinkedIn to join those communities. They brought in customers, they brought in employees, they brought in thought leaders, and they really engaged in a conversation with them. The conversation rarely talked about Philips products. It talked about ideas that were important and relevant to each one of those communities. Now, they were always surrounded by a context that Philips controlled. They were surrounded by advertorial content that would demonstrate why Philips knew something about this issue, but by curating this forum and controlling the context, they were able to really shape the perception of Philips. And at the end result, what they were really looking for was a way to see whether they'd move the needle. And so how many people in the audience are familiar with the notion of Net Promoter Score, or NPS? Some people. NPS is a methodology of evaluating sort of the likelihood that someone will recommend a product or brand. It's really simple. You ask someone to rate a product. You're likely to recommending a product from one scale of 1 to 10. You drop out the middle scores, you subtract the low scores from the high scores, and you have an NPS. So an NPS of 0 means equal numbers of people are recommending your product and not recommending your product. The best brands in the world have an NPS above 50. I think the highest ever, is Amazon or Apple at 70. So the NPS of Philips in this community was over 50, which was a remarkable achievement for Philips. And it really got their most important stakeholders to think differently about Philips and trust Philips as an authority. And so those are the kinds of things that people can do on social media because you have the audience and you have the context.
So building a little bit on that idea of people and what they do online, one of the things that we've discovered over the years is a lot of people have focused, and I think there was a focus on, should we focus on shoppers versus consumers when the gentleman from Unilever spoke. Interestingly, people talk about, I want to talk to my heavy user. And a lot of people believe that the heavy user is the same as a heavy influencer. And all early data indicates that's not true at all. So for instance, most marketing has been built on the heavy user. But the heavy influencer, the heavy user is who uses your product or service. The heavy influencer is someone who's got charisma and network size. Someone who's got a large network and got charisma is a heavy influencer. But even within the heavy influencers, there are two types of influencers. There are advocates, people who like you, and there are detractors, people who hate you. Guess who's 4 times more likely to speak? A detractor and an advocate. A detractor. When something goes wrong, don't you scream and yell and scream and yell? When something goes right, how often do you say it goes right? Now, a heavy detractor is not likely to be a heavy user unless they're like a masochist, right? Which therefore means in the future of marketing, if you only focus on heavy users in an age of the people's network, you are slowly killing your brand. Just think about that. We have built an entire model on heavy users, but in a people's network world, you have to speak to advocates, or rather detractors. If you cannot defang your detractors, it's no use arming your advocates. And that's a fundamental shift. And as a result, networks, like a lot of these networks that you see, underlying it, they've got a lot of mathematics. They've got a lot of mathematics that allow you to identify behavior and identify who to speak to. And that's what they're really doing. They're collecting a lot of information. With that being said, I'd like Earl to talk a little bit about the fact how the whole news media organizations, as well as I think most organizations, have to blow themselves up. Go ahead. You were very...
In terms of how they're doing?
Yes. I gave him some dal, so he got very excited.
They've been slow to the game, but I think they're picking up. When we look worldwide, I would say, I certainly want to think that the Telegraph is a leader, but the Guardian is a leader in the United Kingdom, New York Times is a leader, Chicago Tribune is a leader. You know, the Chicago Tribune a few years ago, or earlier this year, they had a social media department. And what newspapers are generally finding is having a department for social media isn't the best model. What they ended up doing instead is finding a social media champion within the organization. And the Chicago Tribune went employee by employee, teaching 1,000 of their employees how to use Twitter, how to use it effectively, and to create this wonderful echo chamber every day for their content. It seems to me that's a model for most media companies. But I would also share with you a story. I was kind of interested, you were talking about the Telegraph and that murder story. I'm just curious, how much of that story was people discovering it versus when they saw it was hot, then they opted in? Do you have any idea? What's your gut feeling?
It's very difficult to measure. It certainly did start to trend on Twitter, for example, but long before it was trending, we were starting to see a huge number of comments on the site, which weren't necessarily promoted to people who already were looking for something that was hot. It was people finding the article, the original report, which was relatively short, and then leaving a comment. Or people talking on Twitter before it was trending. So there was quite an overwhelming move before we got to the point where, no, this is definitely something to go after.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because there's a newspaper in Spain owned by Schibsted called 20 Minutes. It's a free newspaper. And what we've discovered recently is that they've created a very visual bar on each piece of content they put out there. So you know when you look at that piece of content online, whether it has high social media value or low social media value, if it's being shared with a lot of people and not a lot of people. And what we're finding apparently is, obviously high shared content gets shared more. So you're extending your audience even that much more. What I would, just emphasize to especially the newspaper executives in the room, newspaper executives are always talking about they're running out of room to grow. Social media and the idea of, we're rediscovering the idea of sharing in our industry gives us an opportunity to push beyond our traditional audience in new and different ways. And so maybe, again, that's the secret sauce for newspaper companies.
So I'm going to now have each one of our panelists give you one or two pieces of advice that they would like you to take away and do when you finish this conference. Okay? And I'm going to start, so I'll give them chances to think. So the first is, this entire area is not an area where you can be a scholar. This is an area where you have to be an apprentice. So if you all are not using social media, which means if you are not on Twitter, it doesn't mean you have anything to tweet about. You don't have to tweet that you went to the bathroom. Don't worry, okay? You can follow people, and you can learn stuff. It's free. If you aren't using Twitter, and you are in this business, and you aren't using it after you leave this conference, I would suggest you resign quickly. Okay, you are becoming irrelevant. And it's not just Twitter, it's LinkedIn. In the future, people will not send you resumes. People who send you resumes increasingly, or biodatas, are increasingly old and ancient. They will basically send you their LinkedIn, bio. That's what I'm getting from all over the world now. So you should manage your LinkedIn bio. And if you don't have a bio, that means you don't exist. Okay. The third is, get onto Facebook, because your family, your kids, your friends, your enemies are all there. So you might as well be on there, which is important. Fourth, be there on Google+. For a variety of reasons, I can tell you it's going to work. Okay, that's all I will tell you. It's going to work. And it's going to work in a very big way. So get onto Google+. So if you're not on Google+, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, by the time you get back from this conference, don't say things like social media. Just go and grow a farm somewhere, okay? and get out of the business. That's one very important thing. Because everybody reads. This is not reading. You have to do, okay? And all of us, you can be friends of ours because we are desperate for friends. So you can find our names on LinkedIn. We just became all pals on LinkedIn. You can find us on Facebook, I think. Some of us may be I'll accept everybody's friends. And you can find us on Twitter, okay, which if you type in our name. So you can do that. The second thing, the second piece of advice that I would give you all is this. Do not forget that you actually have real people you market to and you run a business. And if it doesn't make sense from a consumer perspective and it doesn't make sense from a business perspective, don't believe any technology guru or billion-dollar valuation company. Okay? If it doesn't make sense, it means it doesn't make sense. But it's only when you have used it, and then if it doesn't make sense. But now if it doesn't make sense, it just means because you're a nincompoop, right? So get into this and then see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, because right now there are too many technology companies telling marketers how to market. And they're destroying brands. Like Netflix just destroyed its own brand because it had no idea of what consumers are. And so be very, very careful, because you all are brand builders and marketers. And by saying this is not your business means marketing is not your business. Go ahead.
If I may, maybe echoing what you were saying, Kate, you and I were talking about this earlier. If you are nowhere right now, yes, listen to our words, but don't worry about structure at the beginning. Just get on it. Start tweeting. Start creating a social presence. Encourage it on your staff. Encourage it among your reporters. You don't want them to show everything, fair enough. But you've got to get out there. And once you've got some critical mass, I think, with your company, then you can start to structure it. Then you can start to plan for it. And, I'm sure there are those who consult and can get you a business plan moving forward. So I would just start by saying, get on it. Secondly, if you are already on it, chances are in 2007, 8, 9, maybe even 2010, you took advantage of technology and you put up Twitter feeds and you put up Facebook feeds and you automated a lot of stuff. Stop that. People get it now. People know when a headline is being automatically posted. They need to feel that there's a human being and a soul behind what is happening. We say sometimes that newspapers have to have a brand and a brand voice. When you go into the social realm, you have to have a social voice that builds on that brand voice, and it has to be authentic. So if you've got this basic stuff working, you're going to need to commit 1 or 2 people to go out, weave this together, create value, curate the conversation if need be, but also get out there into other websites. Don't obsess about bringing everything back to your website. It's not about just getting out onto Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. Get out there into blogs in your own community. Start commenting. If you're the Times of India, commit the Times of India's voice and brand to building up local businesses and the blogosphere in your area, okay? And don't ask anything in return at first. You'll get something. There'll be a moment where you can put that link and you can link back to your stuff. But add value to that conversation. And then finally, we're talking a lot about LinkedIn, we're talking a lot about Twitter, a lot about Facebook. They're going to look very different in 2 years. I think they'll be around in 10. But the key to take from this is what they've done for us is open up the idea of sharing and social. Okay? I talked with an editor a few weeks ago, traditional 55, 60-year-old editor, and she said something along the lines of, do I have to learn this? Surely this is a fad. Surely it's going away. Can't I just learn the next big thing? And it doesn't work that way. What we take out of this is the sharing. The buckets will come, the buckets will go, but the sharing will be there forever.
You know,